Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the Explore Analytics webinar on forecasting the year ahead. My name is Guy Edwab. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Explore Analytics, and I'm going to walk you through how you can take a look at your data and project it into the future based on historical and live data that you have in ServiceNow or in other data sources today. So the real question before we get into the actual forecasting itself is, why are we doing this? What are we hoping to get out of forecasting, and how does it fit into the data that we already have? And the reason gets at really the core of why we're exploring data in the first place, which is that we want to answer questions. So when you want to look at how you would apply forecasting into your own environment, you really want to ask yourself, what questions do we want to answer? There's three different kinds of questions from a time perspective that you may want to be answering. You might want to be answering questions about historical trends. You might want to be answering questions about the real-time goings on, or you might want to forecast into the future. Today, we're going to focus on the forecasting side of the equation, but it's important to understand how it fits into the other two. The most common way that people are reporting against their data is real time, which is a very tactical way of looking at things, right? You want to have visibility on what's going on right now. There's still space for a lot of advanced analytics, even in real time, in terms of being able to look at things from the perspective of aging, apply calculations. And in this case, you want to really have that real-time connectivity in order to be able to get the most out of the reporting. In addition to the real time, you want to have the ability to do historical trending. And the reason is because this answers questions that put the current state into context, right? You want to see what's currently open, which is real time, but you want to see, is that better or worse than how it's been historically for your organization? That makes historical trending more strategic because you're taking a longer view and you're looking at a wider lens. Forecasting is also strategic, and it answers questions of what's going to happen if things don't change. If we continue on our current path, what can I expect in the future? And that's what we're going to focus on today is how do we answer those questions? But in order to really be able to satisfy your knowledge of the data, you need a solution that delivers all three, the real time, the historical, and the forecasting. I'll give you an example. All the screenshots we saw so far were using average age. So I start with this scorecard that says we currently have an average age of incidents that's fairly large, and it seems to be getting worse. I want to be able to drill into that and see historically how has that changed over time. I want to be able to click to view the details. I want to be able to compare it to the forecast of where it's going to go into the future, and drill down into the details to see, okay, these are the specific incidents and how old they are, and then drill down even further to be able to actually take action and make changes based on what I'm seeing in these reports. So you want to be able to go from the strategic and the long-term view, both historical and forecast, and be able to drill through into the real-time, the tactical, what can we do to actually change that? That's why, from our perspective, you need to be able to balance both the tactical real time and the strategic historical and forecasting to get something that's actionable. Because the goal of asking these questions is to affect change, to take action to change them. So now that we've kind of set the stage of why we want to do this forecasting, the question is also, what's in the way, right? I'm going to walk you through a demonstration of how with a few clicks you can get at that reporting, but there's an underlying issue that blocks a lot of organizations from being able to answer those three questions. How did we get here? What is it like now? And where are we going in the future? What I often hear from IT organizations, from my experience solution architecting in the service management space, is that reporting tools often only provide fragments or pieces of this puzzle. People spend a lot of time in Excel trying to provide status reports or trying to build complex forecasting models, or they build a data warehouse which requires a large integration lift and load. So You want to be able to get to this level of maturity where you're able to easily get past, present, and future without having a lot of roadblock and without a lot of time intensity. I'm here to tell you that there's good news. Explore Analytics, because we're a self-service analytics engine, everything I'm here to show you today doesn't require a large implementation project. It doesn't require heavy technical skill sets or development work to make it work. The goal of self-service analytics using Explore Analytics is interactive slice and dice exploration for every user. I want you to keep that in mind as I show you how we do the forecasting. This is really intended to be something that's even easier than Excel, even easier than any other method of turning around those reports. And it's all software as a service. So at the end, I'll show you how you can try this today and start to play around with your own data if you're not already using Explore Analytics. The reason is because we're going to connect to the data in a different way. The old approach in which a lot of these reports get generated is using a data warehouse. You pull the data out of ServiceNow, you pull the data out of monitoring, you pull the data out of your call system, and you try to build a very complex engine that you can run reports on. But it winds up having stale data that's not up to the minute, so you lose the real time. And it winds up being so locked down and so complex that the average user can't connect to it. And when that fails, what we do in reality is we fix everything with spreadsheets. So we have many, many copies of the data that we've pulled out of Excel spreadsheets, and we wind up doing it manually. It's a mess, and it's a headache, and it keeps you from being able to answer these questions quickly and effectively. So what Explore Analytics does is we have our cloud environment, and we're going to do all of these reports live against the data, so that you're not only able to get the historical, you're also able to get the real time and do the forecasting based on both the real time and the historical, so that you're not basing your forecasts on old versions of the data, right? You're able to be sensitive to new information as it comes up by connecting live using standard drivers to your cloud environments, to your relational databases, your applications internally, or even to spreadsheets and access databases that might host additional information. So now I'm going to transition to looking at Explore Analytics, and I'm going to walk you through a few examples of how we do this, this historical trend and forecasting based off of the data. So this is a fairly common way of looking at data. It's a time series information that's based on a trend that we've put together around the average age of incidents. So I can see that over time, the average age of incidents in my environment has gone up, except towards the end of last year, it dropped precipitously. Don't know if that's a outlier or if we've done something drastic to change our environment. Maybe we went on a project to clean up old issues. But I want to use this data to be able to forecast into the future. Now, in this blue header bar, any user that's viewing Explore Analytics reports can change or look at how this information is being displayed. So the user can see it as bar charts. They can compare it year over year if they'd like to. This is something that any viewer of the data can do just by clicking these controls. Now, if I want to start looking at things from a trend perspective, I have some trend options. So if I select line trend, I get this linear regression trend against my data. And it fits fairly nicely. I can see that it's been sloping upward, and that's a pretty fair way of looking at it. I can also see something like the average or the median, so I can see over the whole data what was our average. I can also do more advanced looks like moving averages or exponential, which is similar to moving, that I'll talk about in a moment. So this is how I see the underlying trend under the data that I'm looking at. But once I have this underlying trend, I have the ability to be able to forecast. So if I turn on forecasting, now it's projecting this into the future. And I can configure how far it's projected to the future. Right now, it's showing me the next 18 months. I can say, okay, just show me the next 12 months. that's how far we're going to forecast. Now, the type of forecasting is going to depend on what kind of trend I'm looking at. So, for example, if I do a linear trend, we project that straight into the future. It's fairly easy to understand, but it might not be the best way of looking at a forecast trend. So, for example, at the end of this data, we have around 200 days. In a year from now, are we going to have nearly 1,000 days based on this trend? Well, with just a linear trend, you might believe so, but it might not necessarily be the best way of forecasting that. With the moving average, what it does is it looks at the trend for the periods surrounding the moving average. So if I say 3 periods, it's looking at the 3 months ahead and the 3 months after that moving average. So it follows the curve a lot more closely, and then when it reaches the end of the data set, it projects a flatly from that going into the future. This might be a little bit more closely aligned to what we'd expect. We're following the data very closely, and we kind of project based on where that data leaves off. The most advanced way that we can look at this forecast, however, is what we call exponential smoothing. What exponential smoothing does is it gives us a few different ways of looking at that data and having control over how we're projecting into the future. So when I go to configure this, I have a few options. I have simple exponential smoothing, which is basically the same as the moving average. We're following the data as closely as we can and then projecting a flat line. But with exponential smoothing, I have this control called alpha. Alpha is an input into the formula that's doing this that gives weights to recent data. In other words, if I make this very high, then what we're saying is that where the data leaves off is more accurate than data earlier in the trend. So you see that when I put a high alpha, it gets really close to the points of data, and it ends almost exactly where the data left off. If I put a low alpha, it doesn't follow it nearly as closely. It smooths out the line. So you can see that it's a little bit closer to the most general average. So that's one level of exponential smoothing. To get to the next more advanced level, we can look at this from a trend perspective. What the trend does is it takes the same exponential smoothing, but rather than just cutting off with a flat line where that last data point was, the beta accounts for the trend. So it's including that same kind of linear slope that we were looking at before. So now, just like the linear trend, when it leaves off, it follows the trend towards the end. And you'll notice that at the end, this was upticking, and this line is generally moving at a similar slope. If you have a very high beta, it's going to, again, look at the most recent data and use that. And the most recent data, even though this little point was ticking up, most of that slope was pointing down. So if we weight the end of that trend very heavily, then we're going to get this strongly negative slope. If we don't, then we get something that's, again, more in line with what we've seen. So now you've seen that using the simple or the trend exponential smoothing, we can project this based on the data and have some control over whether recent information or not recent information is most reliable. The last control is seasonality. And seasonality takes into account that not every day of the year is the same. So the way that seasonality works is it not only compares to the most recent data, it also compares to the same time last year. So for example, if you're on a yearly cycle and every December there's a spike down, you're going to see kind of a yearly spike and a yearly drop. So if we take a look at that, you'll see it, and let's start with, say, a gamma of 0.25. You'll see that it generally goes up, and then it has a little dip late in the year before dipping up again. Again, you have control over what cycle that is. So if you say that there's a 3-year season, the up and down is going to cycle more in terms of 3 years, Whereas, if it's 9 months, then it'll cycle based on a 9-month span. So you have that ability to forecast in that way. And let's say I was to put this for 3 years instead of 1 year of forecast, you can see that every year, in this case, every 9 months, it cycles again, but it also has that underlying beta, which is sloping it upward. So these are a few different concepts that we've put together in the exponential smoothing, and it gives you a lot of control on how you forecast the data. It's very important to understand the assumptions that go into this forecasting. In general, all three of these controls amount to the same thing. With high values, what you're saying is that the most recent history is more relevant than the history that's further in the past. And usually you'll want some level of balance, right? Because you want to look at the full historical trend, but you also want to be sensitive to the fact that the trend may be changing. For example, again, we saw this big drop that's happening around October. Maybe we rolled out a new process change, or we made some new change in our environment that means that this part, this big drop is more reflective of what we'll see next year than, the year that led up to it. Right? It might be that we're returning to where it was before this big spike at the beginning of 2016. Explore Analytics gives you all the controls to be able to do that forecasting however you want, whether you want to do it just through a simple, projection, or you want to look at it from averages, or if you want to get into the more advanced controls of, forecasting and projecting in that way. And again, this is a control that's available through any time series report you create. So I could create a new view from scratch. I'm going to create it against my ServiceNow data, so it's actually going to be live. And it's going to be based on incidents. And we'll call this my incident opened chart. Right, so to create this new view from scratch, I'm going to select the timeline view, and I'm going to say I want this opened by week. All right, so again, now we're getting a much more fine-tuned and fine-grained view, and you'll see that already I have those same options again, the trends, and all the forecasting. So you saw that from scratch, it was just a few clicks to be able to create a new report, have the new trend associated to it, and then if I'd like to, forecast it into the future. So this is an example that we walked through in terms of forecasting the data based on, some piece of data that I've created from ServiceNow. As I mentioned, this is available in any time series of information, as well as if you have multiple levels of information. So this is a report that's using something that we call the Mashup capability. The Mashup allows us to combine two existing reports very easily into one view. So I have here a trend of incidents and a trend of calls, and I'm now forecasting both of them using exponential smoothing. And very easily I can see that based on the increase in the number of calls and the fact that my number of incidents will hold fairly steady, I would expect that my call system will be as active as my incidents somewhere around May of 2018. So again, we're able to look into the future, ask questions, and it's based on the historical information that's already associated there. Now, this forecast is actually coming from live information. So if I want to see what's going on this week, I can drill down and see the details of the incidents or calls that are associated there, and then open that up in ServiceNow or in the other system that this is coming from. That's why it's really key to be able to understand this from the perspective of historical and real time and forecasting in one solution. Now, if I wanted to surface this up to an executive, I can also go to File and say Create a Scorecard on this view. So this is going to create a view that, again, shows me the historical, it shows me the trend, it shows me the change. And at any time, I can go through to see that information about forecasting, everything that we've created. So you have all of the power of these advanced analytics, and they're really available only a few clicks away. Now, one thing I should note about this mashup, if I look at input views, is that we're combining these two live reports. One of them is coming from ServiceNow's incident table. Another is coming from a call system in a MySQL database. And we're combining those in real time. There's no data warehousing involved. There's no copying of the data. We're able to access all of that information in one place. This forecasting that we've been discussing is available even if you start to combine and do calculations against the data. So this is an example of a report called % of overdue changes. This is also a mashup. If I show all of the information and hide my % overdue changes, we have a trend of what's the number of overdue changes. We've mashed it up with all of the changes in the environment. And then we have a formula here that's giving me the ratio of overdue changes to all changes times 100 to make it into a percentage, which allows me to have this calculated measure called overdue changes that we want to keep as a certain %. I can see here the dotted line shows me where 100% is, so we're really falling behind. And I have this % that I'm trending, so I can say, all right, if I forecast this, it's very easy to see that, let's say, somewhere around July, we're going to be hitting all of my changes as overdue changes unless we make some sort of a change. So even if you're going into more advanced calculations or underlying trends, you can get this forecasting information, and it's still just as simple as clicking these buttons at the top to be able to track that over time. One last example of forecasting. Right now, this % of overdue changes is being displayed as that percentage. But I can also dig a little deeper into this data and say, instead of showing me the % changes, I want to see the % difference from the previous month. So now, instead of showing me, and I want to remove this reference line. So now it's showing me that if I move back a little, in November there was a 5.1% decrease. In October it increased by 3.3%. In December it went up. So now if I pull an average, I can see that on average the number of overdue changes is increasing month over month between 5 and 10%. Again, that's something I can very easily see just by looking at this, not in terms of what's the actual percentage, but how is that percentage changing over time. So you can see that our ability to do live calculations, to combine data from multiple data sources and put it all together on one dashboard makes us very able to do those projections and forecasts into the future. Now, once you have your forecasts and you've done this projecting into the future, there's a really important step, which is how are people going to interact with and understand this data? So I'm going to take this report and I'm going to say, okay, file, publish this report as we see it. I could save it frozen. That'll allow us to return in the future and compare the future real-time data to this current forecasted projection. I'm going to have this be live so that I can put it on a dashboard and see how this projection changes. And I'm going to say, let's publish this to ServiceNow. So when I publish this, I have the ability to share a URL. I can embed it into any HTML place. But I can also go to my ServiceNow environment. I have this dashboard called Incident Trends in ServiceNow. And I'm going to grab this Explore Analytics report called Trend of Incidents versus Calls to Call System. And I'm going to add it here on my dashboard. And you'll see that if I allow it, the user that's viewing this still has all of this capability. So if I'm looking at this on my dashboard and say, actually, I'd like to know what the averages are right now for the data set, I can do that. Or I can say, show me just 2 years of the data, give it to me as a median. You'll notice that the median in this case is a lot more accurate than the average for the incidents. Or, I could see it in other ways. Get an area chart or a stock chart or a combo chart. However I want to be able to view that. As a viewer that's consuming this report, I have that flexibility. Again, I see a lot in IT organizations that people are building and rebuilding the same reports because one person wants to see a 6-month trend, another person wants to see an 8-month trend. I want to see the average, and another person thinks a median is more accurate. Instead, you're giving these capabilities to your users to be able to view that, whether that's through a ServiceNow dashboard or whether that's through other HTML portals that they can, have their interactive controls and drill through the data. Just to tie it all back together, remember that you can do this forecasting against any data that has a time element to it. And if you want to create a historical trend, so for example, if I look at this report, actually, let's do open incidents by priority. Let's suppose I have this, this is the real-time report that tells me, okay, 15% of my incidents are currently critical, 70% are high. If I want to create historical data around this so that I can forecast it in the future, it's still as simple as one click. I'm going to go to File and say Track Trends. And I'll just say where in Explore Analytics we want to store this historical information and what schedule we want to put this on. I don't have to have a report administrator build breakdowns and indicators or database views and all of those components. I can really just do that, with a couple simple clicks. So now we've walked through a few examples, and we've seen how in Explore Analytics you can move easily from the real-time and the historical to be able to do forecasting and present all three of them together in one dashboard using the same user interface and the same point-and-click controls to be able to deliver that. So now if anyone has any questions, there's a speech bubble icon that you can click on the bar at the top if you want to submit any questions for this webinar. Great. So the first question I got is in terms of how you can get your hands on it to try it for yourself. It's a perfect question. So you'll notice that all of this is cloud-based. So if you go to my exploreanalytics.com, there's a try it button, and you can find your way to this registration form. This is where you can sign up for a free 30-day trial. So you just put in your credentials, and it'll create an Explore Analytics environment for you. And then all you have to do is either upload a data file or add a new data source to connect to immediately. So for ServiceNow, there's a standard integration you can apply. You can connect to your Microsoft SQL server that has your call system data, or Informix for Cisco UCCX, or SQLite if you're using that as a database. So whichever of these data sources you want to connect to, you can do that in a free trial and build kind of whatever reports you're interested in building. It's a great question. Thank you. Great. So there's another question in terms of the how this is being display to users. One of the things that's great is that because this is all coming through HTML5, your question about different browsers and compatibility, it's all responsive design. So you can deploy it to someone who is using it on a mobile phone, and they'll be able to, and it's all touch enabled. They'll be able to move through. They can have it full screen. However you want to present it to the users, they'll be able to access it. They just need any sort of a web browser, whether it's mobile or tablet or desktop browser. I see a question about if there's no data warehousing, how does it affect the live system and what sort of latency is being experienced? That's a great question. So one thing that's important to understand in terms of how we're doing the live querying, if I pull open that architecture, is, so let's say you open up one of these 2-year trends of incidents, and then you want to do some forecasting against it, and you're going live against this, say, the ServiceNow data, for example. We don't pull all the rows of data to explore analytics in order to do that. This is what makes us unique from any other reporting solution that's out there. Instead, what we do is we put a query to an API that we've designed in ServiceNow that allows us to ask ServiceNow how many incidents were opened by month, and group that or filter that appropriately, and then ServiceNow just returns to us the results. So it's not very database intensive for ServiceNow or for any of these other applications, because we're not pulling hundreds of thousands of rows. Instead, we're getting just a small piece of information, which is the result of that aggregate query, or in some cases, multiple queries. So we have customers that are large, Fortune 50 global customers that have live reports on dashboards for hundreds of users, 1,000 users, through that dashboard, and they're not seeing any latency. In addition, we put in controls to make sure that we never swamp the data sources that we're connecting to. So we're never going to put so many connections at the same time that it's going to create a slowdown. So we're making sure that if 1,000 users open 1,000 complex reports at the same time, some of those reports might load a little bit slower than others, but you're not going to see degradation on the system that you're reporting against. That's a great question. Thank you. Any other questions about kind of the forecasting, how we're putting this together? Yeah, so the question is about which of these reports are out of the box versus what you'll have to create yourself. We have optionally available something that we call our IT Service Management Analytical Application, which has pre-built views around incidents, problem, change. So for example, within change management, things like, I removed this view that I added, things like what are the upcoming changes? How many high-risk emergency failed or late changes have we had? And again, in this case, we're using the Mashup to look at them together so we can see them all at once. So this ITSM analytical application has around 12 or 13 dashboards with a lot of the pre-built views. If you want to see them, you can go to exploreanalytics.com/demo, and that's going to redirect you to a sandbox ServiceNow environment where you can actually see the analytical application reports fully live, fully interactive in a ServiceNow environment that has a lot of these pre-built views. We also have a pre-built analytical application around business service management. So if you have configuration items in your CMDB mapped up to business services, we can automatically roll up incident, problem, change, service catalog information to the upstream business services. And so we have this analytical application that shows the health of services, the SLA, the availability, etc., based on your information. Again, fully interactive and kind of fully there. Great. So another question is whether the forecasting is available kind of for everyone today. Yes, everything that I showed today is already present in Explore Analytics. You have to make sure that you're looking at the any timeline, that you're looking at it as a line chart. If it's a bar chart, we don't kind of do the projections off of that. So you switch it to a line, and you should be able to see the trend options. And then if your trend options are on, that's what will make the forecast appear. It's a great question. Thanks. Any other questions about forecasting in specific or about Explore Analytics in general? Great. So a question about kind of what the licensing looks like if you're looking to buy this. So Explore Analytics, we do this based off of the user subscription license, named user subscription license. We have two different types of user. We have what we call a full user, which is the person who is building these reports. So when I was over here and I was saying, okay, show this to me date by month, building those filters, that's what a full user would be able to do, be able to publish. And then we have what we call a limited user, which are the folks who can log in to see this on the dashboard. They can see contextual reports, like for example, this group manager can see things all in context of users that are assigned to them, but they're not building reports from scratch. So the full users are $25 per user per month. And the limited users start at $12.50 per user per month, and they're in packs of 50. They're intended as a volume license. If you have any questions about what licensing would look like in your environment, get more specifics, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to kind of say, oh, for this number of users, for this number of limited users, this is what you'd be looking at it as an annual subscription. There's volume licensing and things like that come into play. It's a great question. Any other questions from folks who are attending? Yeah, so this is a very good question, which is the environment that this person is describing is changing as we roll out our solution to multiple other companies across their locations, their increased user base. So the question is, how can we better forecast when there's lots of people coming on board and the changes are being made? And I think this is a great question. You always have to be careful, right, because of the assumption. I said early at the beginning, right, that forecasting is answering the question, what happens if things don't change? Right, and the person who's asked this question is saying, well, in our environment, things are changing, pretty rapidly. So there's a couple of things that that I would recommend that you do as part of this. One is, often we're looking at this in terms of the raw number of things that are being created. But one metric that I like to look at is, say, incidents or requests per user. So in the ITSM analytical application, we have this notion of end user demand, which is incidents plus service requests. And you'll notice that this one is per user. So what we do is we say, what are the number of active users? And then we take the incidents and requests and divide it by that. The reason is because then you can say, okay, not only I have, let's say, in this case, every 100 users will open 8 incidents. Okay, if we add another 1,000 users, then I would expect to see 80 more incidents than forecasting there. So in that way, you can kind of leverage that to forecast a little bit more accurately, because you can actually put numbers to that change, right? If we're rolling out to a new location and that new location has 20 new people, that may add to us, X number of incidents based on that. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is, I mentioned that, right, you have all of these controls to be able to tweak the projections and the forecasting. Now, a lot of people will think you'll do the forecasting and then you'll set it and forget it and walk away. In my opinion, what you should do is you should schedule this to be generated on a regular basis and frozen so that you can keep a record. Okay, you're going to predict 3 months in the future. If there's a lot of overhead and a lot of change, probably the first 3 months that you're doing this, you're going to not exactly hit the mark. But 3 months from now, look at your 3-month projection from 3 months from now and say, okay, what did we think was going to happen and what happened? If you do that kind of again and again, you're going to get this continual improvement of your forecasting, especially if you start to use this to understand what's changing in the environment. So, for example, is a per user metric going to help you kind of clear away the noise? Or maybe it's per location. Maybe it's per configuration item, right? If you're standing up a new data center, maybe that's what's going to be influencing this change, right? Maybe it's actually how many the ratio of service desk people to the people that you're serving is important. What's key is that however you want to dig into the data, because the formulas you put against it, just to go back to this formula example, because it's all using this formula builder, and you can pull data from any table in ServiceNow or outside of ServiceNow, you could have a formula that you develop over time that says, okay, the number of new users plus the number of existing users divided by the number of service desk employees, all of that as a metric that you want to track over time to understand change. So I think that was a little bit of a long-winded answer. I hope that helps kind of understand how I look at things, which is in order to forecast accurately about change, what's changing? Can you measure that actual change itself? And then can you compare that change as it goes forward? It was a really good question. Thank you. Are there any other questions about Explore Analytics, about forecasting, about combining data from multiple data sources? Great. The recording of this will be made available. If you have any further questions, you can go to the Explore Analytics website, and if you click the Try It Free button, you can find information about the pricing. You can click to try it now. You can view the demo, or you can contact me. I'd be happy to set up a time to look at your use cases with you, help you look at your forecasting, and help you get what you need from Explore Analytics. Thank you all for your time, and have a great rest of your day.